Alright guys, it's Scrappy again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying all day so far. After a disastrous result against Toronto for the Los Angeles Thieves, big questions are being raised as to whether this roster will not last even another weekend of the test of time that we expected this team to get this season. Octane thinks enough is enough. Getting 3-0'd by Toronto in the way that they did, given the expectations of this team, that means changes are necessary. Neum also responds to some of the rumours that his Ravens roster, before he decided to hold off on that idea, was getting slammed in scrims. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Lots to get into. We're going to start here because the Challengers Cup did conclude yesterday. As I mentioned last night, none of the elite teams were in this. Now notably, Stallions came top 4, which on a normal weekend would be fine. But this time, given there's 12 teams that aren't there, is not exactly ideal, especially given that Legends team, with Zuna, Mirage, Collect, and Legends, they made the finals. So definitely a talking point, right? Because Legends left/was dropped. It was all a little bit confusing, but effectively Legends left in a roundabout way the Stallions red team. He's gone on to join this new roster instead of going back home to France. And well, guess what, right? They end up making the finals of the Cup that Stallions Red don't. Now, they didn't win it. That was won by For Fun Esports. Pretty clearly, I think the best team that didn't make it to the elite, that's Flames & Co. So they get the victory 4-0 in the grand finals. But let's talk about Thieves, because they were the key storyline of last night, and where do they go from here? Now, aBeZy had a few thoughts on Ghosty. You can understand why. This guy's been sensational so far this season, and that was true when we first heard about this guy already in Challengers, when he was playing with Doug, dropping 1.3s at Challengers tournaments. When he came into the league with OpTic, which was a surprise at the time, OpTic picked up an actual rookie, right? We'd not usually see OpTic do anything like that, but it worked out for them, right? But he wasn't a 1.3 dropper, he was a 0.95 dropper that game, but he would do the comms, he would get all the hill time, and Ghosty was a good asset to that team. Now look, was it the right call getting rid of Ghosty, bringing in Kenny for the upcoming season? Yeah, they went on to win the World Championship that year. And if you were going to change a player on that team, Ghosty was alongside Dashy that season. It's not like Dashy was going to get dropped, certainly not again. And then Ghosty last year was alongside Scrap. So if there was one AR that had to go, again, there was probably only one answer. Ghosty has been talked about, though, in the context of difficult to team with and stuff like this. aBeZy says, look, he's a bit problematic out of the game. He's got the Haggy problem that he's been dropped off a couple of teams. Now, it's still relatively early in Ghosty's career. I think, even probably himself, he might look back at his first year and say, okay, maybe I can see why OpTic made the decisions they did. I don't know. The reality is that Ghosty, his numbers this season are so good that it doesn't matter anyway, because he's not even in threat of being dropped. And I don't imagine that will be a conversation if things continue as they currently are. Maybe this was where they were meant to be all along, but it's just, for Thieves' perspective, the Ghosty drop looks like a remarkable decision, right? If you didn't know some of the intricacies here, looking at this season and thinking, damn, they just dropped Ghosty, who looks like maybe not the best, although apparently if you ask Grok, he says that Ghosty is the best player in the game. So, look, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but to be fair, right now, Ghosty has been performing like it so far. I know it's only online and stuff like that, but he's been Gentlemate's best player, and they're certainly close to being the best team in the game. So Ghosty's honestly in that conversation. Bare minimum, I think Ghosty is probably a top 3 player. You could say top 5, but even then I think that might be underselling him a little bit based on the way that he's played so far in this game. So that's the question for Thieves to answer, is like, okay, I understand why they felt like a change was necessary at the end of last season, but fundamentally they've dropped a player in Ghosty who's now top 3, I would say, in this game, and then for Kenny, who at times last year was probably bottom 3 and isn't a million miles away from that this season either. So JoeDeceives is having a good time with it. They'd already won the game 1. The bodies were getting teabagged already, even though they lost the round. Of course, JoeDeceives then goes on to pop that crazy 4-piece in the final round of this map here, and then they go on to win the series. We talked about it all last night. Kenny's reaction, Scrap's reaction here is, it's actually kind of sad, I guess, but it is pretty funny at the same time, because Scrap does look like a man. I know some of you guys are pointing it out of the comment trail. Scrap looked sadder after this series than he did after getting bopped out of some of these world championships. So you've got to wonder what next, especially given there was lots of talk, and for good reason, about potential changes being required. So these were the final numbers of that series. If you guys didn't see yesterday's video, 0.66 for Ken. That was kind of the key point turning heads again. And Octane, look, he's on Thieves, big Thieves fan, big Kenny fan, supporting that organization. But yeah, he thinks it might be at this point just a little bit too far gone. And Octane, you know, he said it as soon as the series was over. He thinks they need to have a different roster next weekend. He then doubled down and said, look, I think it's probably time, because it just looks like it could be a little bit far gone mentally. I think that's the problem. I still think there's a world where this team of 4 could work. Now, maybe that's a world where Kenny is a better player than he is today. I mean, obviously, the last couple of years have been pretty bad for him, for sure, after winning the World Championship, as we know. Doesn't look like it's Prime Kenny anymore. I don't know if Prime Kenny is ever coming back, right? And we've seen it with, for example, Drazah on FaZe. He had that slump, and I'm not saying that he's out of the slump. He had 1.3 against OpTic. Doesn't necessarily mean that Drazah's going to be unstoppable now for the rest of time. But what we do know is that Drazah is probably still more likely to be closer to a prime Drazah, if not potentially could still get there again, rather than Kenny at this point, because there's just been too many series and too many months, really, of Kenny playing at this type of level with these level of inconsistencies and all of that stuff. And frankly, there's not even that much inconsistency. You'll see a lot of series like this out of Ken over the last 12 months or so, really, at this point. So, and that's what happened to OpTic, and then he was gone. Look, people are going to talk about aBeZy as well. I can understand it. But equally, you could argue that last year on OpTic, you know, the team was going 0-18. They did make a change, and you know, obviously they made a couple of changes. Pred was part of that drama as well, but so was Kenny, and then they got rid of Kenny, and you know, maybe you could argue that there's a common trend here. The reality is, even if I think this team could potentially work, mentally, that is the question, right? Is it possible for this team to recover? Because it feels like they're kind of compromised, and it also feels like Thieves have, I don't know, have they managed to squander it again with a team of superstars? Because it feels like the amount of talent that this team has had, the success they've achieved just isn't really there. And look, they're playing a Toronto team who undoubtedly are pretty damn good right now, but to get 3-0'd in the way that they did yesterday, it's difficult to imagine they're going to turn up to LAN, even if they do keep this team and do any sort of damage. And if they don't, then surely something's got to change, because especially from, let's say, Nadeshot's perspective and from Thieves' management perspective, everyone knows that next year HyDra and Scrap could be available on the market. They probably will be. Their contracts are over. Teams, certainly the Falcons among others, they could try and make a move here. And if Thieves don't get the success out of these guys now, then maybe they never will be able to get the opportunity to again. So let me share a couple of clips here, then we'll talk a little bit more about it.
You can see it on Scrappy's face right there. Look at him. He's like, what the fuck?
He actually does a fucking...
And they zoom in on a guy. This guy's like, holy shit, dude.
Nah, that's actually sad, Loki.
Yeah, he hasn't moved.
Yeah, that was actually sad.
All right, well.
This night that poke was in we'll loan him to you up for a pretty good number. You know what I mean?
Over, bro.
It's all over, bro. It's wait, also the side though. I genuinely don't think we see this team next weekend.
They shouldn't. We should not see this team next weekend. We should not. They can't just have a 0.5, bro. Holy shit.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, but the problem is you bring in Neon, it's not gonna entirely fix all.
Yeah, but more kills will definitely help.
It's time.
Man,
It's time, bro. This team looks like they had no break. This team looks like they played a match yesterday, and it's the exact same team, bro. I don't know what the fuck they did with their Christmas. Maybe they went home. Word to nub. Maybe they went home for the Christmas holiday and didn't play the game. Ken obviously can't purchase one. Tyler and Paco look fucking awful. I mean, like, Paco went positive today, but watching those two play Call of Duty together as like a tandem sub duo right now is fucking mind blowing. It's just so bad. Ken obviously is a problem. He can't get a kill. The Overload today was one of the worst maps I've watched this season. Brother, I genuinely don't know. They look like they had no break. They look like they didn't try to get better. Every map today was fucking awful. So if I see this roster going forward, I think it's actually malpractice, truthfully.
And yeah, listen, we know they're going to drop Kin. I tried to get it early, but we know it's going to happen now. Unfortunately, I think, and to what Ben alluded to, is like, even after they drop Kin, which don't get me wrong, they are going to get much better. They still got some problems to solve, bro. You know, I'm hearing they're not taking practice as serious. aBeZy's got to figure it the fuck out. And I think Scrap and HyDra got to be a bit more open to like, hey, you guys suck right now. You need to really look at why that is outside of just Kenny. And hopefully they can have some maturity and get in the lab with their coaches and just,
what a fucking
improve, bro.
Patrick Price take
That might be one
right
of Pat's
there.
best takes ever on the
That
show.
was fantastic, Pat.
So is it time for Thieves to pull the trigger on a change? We've seen a couple of teams do it, Surge obviously, and Ravens lower down the league. But of the top teams, we were thinking, should FaZe even do it? But again, I think that was probably a bit premature. They decided to hold off. They've decided to bring in a Lurqxx on the sub bench, but nothing continuing from there. But for the Thieves, it's kind of a more interesting question because, sure, they could run it out the next couple of weekends of qualifiers. Maybe they will with this roster. They'll go to the major with it, and then they'll make a decision based off that. But is that going to, is that not the best idea? Do you want to have a better runway with a new player? Is Neum the right man for the job? I mean, they've got options to sign him. They have the ability, if they want to go and pick him up from Huntsman, they've negotiated an arrangement where they can go and do exactly that. And at this point, that feels far more likely than not that they will sign Neum at some point. It may not be immediately, like today. It may be in the coming days. Who knows? It could be after Major 1, but it feels like it probably at this point will happen, which, of course, look, it would only probably be Kenny departing in that scenario. Now, we talked yesterday that Simp had revealed that when they were doing the Ravens trials, Exceed was cooking in them and Neum was getting slammed. They couldn't get a point with Neum, is what Simp said. But Neum drops a million question marks, presumably implying, don't know what you're talking about there, Dante. Like, I was cooking or the team was still looking good. Because, this is also kind of important for the narrative for Neum. It comes at an interesting time because, Neum is definitely keeping one eye, if not both eyes, on what's happening with Thieves. And if there's this rumor going around that, maybe Neum's not that guy, right? Who did the trials of the pro team, wasn't as good, it was worse than Exceed and all this, then it does detract a little bit. So Neum's at least pushing back and saying, hold on a second here, let's fact check this a little bit because, Neum wants Thieves to be sure that this guy could deliver if they were to put him into the team. So, it's all been going on. What do you guys expect? I think there's also a good question now. I mean, it's kind of happened quicker than I thought, but on the Lurqxx question, right? Because I don't think anyone was questioning FaZe making the decision. Lurqxx seemed like a promising talent. FaZe bring him on as a substitute. They prevent anyone else having him. They put some pressure on the starting roster. All of those things have worked in FaZe's favour, and it's gone very well for them. The question really was on Lurqxx's side. Was it the right call to sign with FaZe? Now, you get an opportunity to sign with FaZe on the sub-bencher team that at the time looked a little bit ropey. It makes perfect sense. But in hindsight, here we are a couple of weeks further down the line. There is an argument that had Lurqxx hold, has he waited out? Had he decided to sign with the Thieves instead? Or waited out for it because Thieves were interested. We did hear the confirmation of that from Zuma, that by the time Thieves reached out and said, hey, we want to try and get Lurqxx, he'd already been signed to FaZe. So that was just, unfortunately, they missed the boat on that one. And look, maybe Neum can still do a great job, and maybe they will bring him in. Maybe it's the right call, right? But Lurqxx could have also been an option for him, and it seems like he was ahead in the power rankings of Neum, but the opportunity is still very much there. So look, Thieves are 2-2. It's not disastrous, of course, but they're 6-7 in terms of their win-loss. So they're sitting at 7th right now. And, Ravens, they're making some progress. They're sitting at 8th. So, yeah, Thieves currently the 7th seed, which is obviously not pretty because even if they do make it to the winners bracket, which, I mean, maybe you could even question how likely that is on current levels, but, assuming that they do with their current roster, they'll probably have a difficult first round game, which could spiral into an increasingly difficult tournament. So yes, very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.